Today, class, I will be reading section from Descartes' key philosophical writings. I will finish, whatchamacallit, Bukowski. I might just, my upload things stopped working, properly when I was doing it, so I didn't get to finish it at the time. But I will get around to finishing it. Just for, a change of tone, let's read something more that isn't fiction. So here we go. Rules for the direction of the mind, Descartes. The end of study should be to direct the mind towards the enunciation of sound and correct judgments in all matters that come before it. Whenever men notice some similarity between two things, they are wont to ascribe to each, even in those respects in which the two differ, what they have found to be true of the other. Thus they erroneously compare the sciences, which entirely consists in the cognitive exercise of the mind, with the arts, which depend upon which depend upon an exercise and disposition of the body. They see that not all the arts can be acquired by the same man, but that he who restricts himself to one most readily becomes the best executant, since it is not so easy for the same hand to adapt itself both to agricultural operations and to harp playing, or to the performance of several such tasks as one alone. Hence they have held the same to be true of the sciences also, and distinguishing them from one another according to their subject matter, they have imagined that they ought to be studied separately, each in isolation from all the rest. But this is certainly wrong. For since the sciences taken altogether are identical with human wisdom, which always remains one and the same, however applied to different subjects, and suffers no more differentiation proceeding from them than the light of the sun experiences from the variety of things which it illumes. There is no need for minds to be confined at all within limits, for neither does the knowing of one truth have an effect like that of the acquisition of one art and prevent us from finding out another. It rather aids us to do so. Certainly it appears to me strange that so many people should investigate human customs with such care, the virtues of plants, the motions of the stars, the transmutations of metals, and the objects of similar sciences, while at the same time practically none bethink themselves about good understanding or universal wisdom, though nevertheless all other studies are to be esteemed not so much for their own value as because they contribute something to this. Consequently, we are justified in bringing forward this as the first rule of all, since there is nothing more prone to turn us aside from the correct way of seeking out truth than this directing of our inquiries, not towards their general end, but towards certain special investigations. I do not here refer to perverse and censurable pursuits like empty glory or base gain. Obviously, counterfeit reasonings and quibbles suited to vulgar understanding open up a much more direct route to such a goal than does a sound appreciation of the truth. But I have in view even honourable and laudable pursuits, because these mislead us in a more subtle fashion. For example, take our investigations of those sciences conducive to the conveniences of life, for which yield that pleasure which is found in the contemplation of truth, practically the only joy in life that is complete and untroubled with any pain. There we may indeed expect to receive the legitimate fruits of scientific inquiry, but if in the course of our study we think of them, they frequently cause us to omit of many facts which are necessary to the understanding of other matters, because they seem to be either of slight value or of little interest. Hence we must believe that all sciences are so interconnected that it is much easier to study them all together than to isolate one from all the others. If therefore anyone wishes to search out the truth of things in serious earnest, he ought not to select one special science, for all the sciences are conjoined with each other and interdependent. He ought rather to think how to increase the natural light of reason, not for the purpose of resolving this, or that the difficulty of scholastic type, but in order that his understanding may light his will to its proper choice in all the contingencies of life. In a short time he will see with amazement that he has made much more progress than those who are eager about particular ends, and that he has not only obtained all that they desire, but even higher results that fall within his expectation. Alright, well, I'll read the next bit. 2. Okay. Only those objects should engage our attention to the sure and indubitable knowledge of which our mental powers seem to be adequate. Science in its entirety is true and evident cognition. He is no more learned who has doubts on many matters than the man who has never thought of them. Nay, he appears to be less learned if he has formed wrong opinions on any particulars. Hence, it were better not to study at all than to occupy oneself with objects of such difficulty, that owing in our inability to distinguish true from false, we are forced to regard the doubtful as certain. For in those matters, any hope of augmenting our knowledge is exceeded by the risk of diminishing it. Thus, in accordance with the above maxim, we direct all such merely probable knowledge and make it a rule to trust only what is completely known and incapable of being doubted. No doubt men of education may persuade themselves that there is but little of such certain knowledge, because, forsooth, a common failing of human nature has made them deem it too easy and open to everyone, and so led them to neglect to think upon such truths. But I nevertheless announce that there are more of these than they think, truths which suffice to give a rigorous demonstration of innumerable propositions, the discussion of which they have hitherto been unable to free from the element of probability. Further, because they have believed that it is unbecoming for a man of education to confess ignorance at any point, they have so accustomed themselves to trick out their fabricated explanations that they have ended by gradually imposing on themselves, and thus have issued them with to the public as genuine. Um, but if we adhere closely to this rule, we shall find left but few objects of legitimate study, for there is scarce any question occurring in the science about which talented men have not disagreed. But whenever two men come to opposite directions about the same matter, one of them at least must certainly be in the wrong, and apparently there is even not even one of them who knows. For if the reasoning of the second was sound and clear, he would be able to lay it before the other as finally to succeed in convincing his understanding also. Hence, apparently, we cannot attain to a perfect knowledge in any such case of probable opinion, for it would be rashness to hope for more than others have attained to. I think I picked the perfect book. Consequently, if we reckon correctly, of the sciences already discovered, arithmetic and geometry alone are left, to which the observance of this rule reduces us. Yet we do not therefore condemn that method of philosophizing which others have already discovered, and those weapons of the schoolmen, probable syllogisms, which are so well suited for polemics. They indeed give practice to the wits of youth, and producing emulation among them, act as a stimulus, and it is much better for their minds to be moulded by the opinions of this sort, uncertain though they appear, as being objects of controversy among the learned, than to be left entirely to their own devices. For thus, through lack of guidance, they might stray to some abyss, but as long as they follow in their master's footsteps, though they may diverge at times from the truth, they will yet certainly find a path which is at least in this respect safer, that it has been approved of by more prudent people. We ourselves rejoice that we in earlier years experienced the scholastic training, but now being released from that oath of allegiance which bound us to our old masters, and since as it becomes our riper years, we are no longer subject to the rule, if we wish to in earnest to establish for ourselves those rules which shall aid us in scaling the heights of human knowledge, we must admit assuredly among the primary members of our catalogue the maxim which forbids us to abuse our leisure as many do, who neglect all easy quests and take up their time only with difficult matters. For they, though certainly making all sorts of subtle conjectures and elaborating most probable arguments with great ingenuity, frequently find out too late that after all their labours that they have only increased the multitude of their doubts without acquiring any knowledge whatsoever. But now let us proceed to explain more carefully our reasons for saying, as we did a little while ago, that of all the sciences known as yet, arithmetic and geometry alone are free from any taint of falsity or uncertainty. We must note then that there are two ways by which we arrive at the knowledge of facts, viz., by experience and by deduction. We must further observe that while our inferences from experience are frequently fallacious, deduction, or the pure elation of one thing from another, though it may be passed over if it is not seen through, cannot be erroneous when performed by an understanding that is in the least degree rational. And it seems to me that the operation is profited but little by those constraining bonds by means of which the dialecticians claim to control human reason, though I do not deny that this discipline may be serviceable for other purposes. My reason for saying so is that none of the mistakes which men can make, men I say, not beasts, are due to faulty inference. They are caused merely by the fact that we found upon a basis of poorly comprehended experiences, or that propositions are posted which are hasty and groundless. This furnishes us with an evident explanation of the great superiority and certitude of arithmetic and geometry to other sciences. The former alone deal with an object so pure and uncomplicated that they need no assumptions at all which experience renders uncertain, but wholly consist in the rational deduction of consequences. They are on that account much of the easiest and clearest of all, and possess an object such as we require, for in them it is scarce humanly possible for anyone to err except by inadvertence. And yet we should not be surprised to find that plenty of people of their own accord prefer to apply their intelligence to other studies or to philosophy. The reason for this is that every person permits himself the liberty of making guesses in the matter of an obscure subject with more confidence than in one which is clear, and that it is much easier to have some vague notion about a subject, no matter what, than to arrive at the real truth about a single question, however simple that might be. But one conclusion now emerges out of these considerations is not indeed that arithmetic and geometry are the sole sciences to be studied, but only that in our search for the direct road towards truth, we should busy ourselves with no object about which we cannot attain a certitude equal to that of the demonstrations of arithmetic and geometry. There's a couple of notes in the ledger here, but I'll skip them. 3. In the subjects we propose to investigate, our inquiry should be directed not to what others have thought, nor to what we ourselves conjecture, but to what we can clearly and perspicuously behold and with certainty deduce, for knowledge is not won in any other way. To study the writings of the ancients is right, because it is a great boon for us to be able to make use of the labours of so many men, and we should do so, both in order to discover what they have correctly have made out in previous ages, but also that we may inform ourselves as to what in the various sciences is still left for investigation. But yet there is a great danger lest in a too absorbed study of these works, we should become effective with their errors, guard against them as we may. For it is the way of writers, whenever they have allowed themselves rashly and credulously to take up a position in any controverted matter, to try with the subtlest of arguments to compel us to go along with them. But when, on the contrary, they have happily come upon something certain and evident, in displaying that it will never fail to surround it with ambiguities, fearing, it would seem, lest the simplicity of their explanation should make us respect their discovery less, or because they grudge us an open vision of the truth. Can't think of anybody specifically right now. Further supposing now that all were wholly open and candid, and never thrust upon us doubtful opinions as true, but expounded every matter in good faith, yet since scarce anything has been asserted by any one man, the contrary of which has not been alleged by another, we should be eternally uncertain which of the two to believe. It would be no use to total up the testimonies in favour of each, meaning to follow that opinion which was supported by the greater number of authors. For if it is a question of difficulty that in this dispute it is more likely that the truth would have been discovered by few than by many. But even though all these men agreed among themselves, what they teach us would not suffice for us. For we shall not, e.g., for example, all turn out to be mathematicians, though we know by heart all the proofs that others have elaborated, unless we have an intellectual talent that fits us to resolve difficulties of any kind. Neither, though, have we mastered all the arguments of Plato and Aristotle, if yet we have not the capacity for passing a solid judgment on these matters, shall we become philosophers. We should have acquired the knowledge not of science but of history. I lay down the rule also that we must wholly refrain from ever mixing up conjectures with our pronouncements on the truth of things. This warning is of no little importance. There is no stronger reason for finding nothing in the current philosophy which is so evident and certain as not to be capable of being controverted, than the fact that the learned, not content with the recognition of what is clear and certain in the first instance, hazard the assertion of obscure and ill-comprehended theories at which they have arrived merely by probable conjecture. Then afterwards they gradually attach complete credence to them, and mingling them with promiscuously with what is true and evident, they finish by being unable to deduce any conclusion which does not appear to depend on some proposition of the doubtful sort, and hence is not uncertain. But lest we in turn should slip into the same error, we shall here take note of all those mental operations by which we are able, wholly without fear of illusion, to arrive at the knowledge of things. Now I admit only two, viz., intuition and deduction. By intuition I understand not the fluctuating testimony of the senses, nor the misleading judgment that proceeds from blundering constructions of imagination, not thinking about anybody specifically here, but the conception of an unclouded and attentive mind gives us so readily and distinctly that we are wholly freed from doubt that which we understand. Or what comes to the same thing, intuition is the undoubting conception of an unclouded and attentive mind, and springs from the light of reason alone. It is more certain than deduction itself, in that it is simpler, though deduction, as we have noted above, cannot by us be erroneously conducted. Thus each individual can mentally have